Today's first AP Human Geography lecture is going to come from Unit 1. This is covering geography basics. So we're going to be looking at vocabulary, terms that are going to be introduced today, but we're going to go in more depth with later when we get to later units. So this all comes from the Cultural Landscape. This is the textbook that you have written by Rubenstein. You all should have a copy. If any of you do not, please reach out as soon as possible so we can make sure that you get a copy. The first thing you're going to do today is participate in warm-up. So I hope that you respond to these questions in a notebook, or maybe you type them up, but have them in a collective place so that you can refer to them later. When we meet for our discussion, I will be asking these questions and I may cold call on you. So you want to make sure that you're prepared and you know what you're going to say. You can go ahead and pause here. I don't want anyone to feel anxious about trying to rush to write anything down, and I will build in a few minutes so that we have plenty of time before we do meet for our discussion. So again, feel free to pause here if you need to. So the questions are, what was the last map that you looked at, and why did you look at it? Today's objective, you should be able to, by the end of this lecture, describe the location and distribution of the map in writing. So again, you should feel very comfortable once we're done. So when people think of geography, they often think that people are looking at maps all day. And there's so much more to geography than maps. However, I don't want to disregard the fact that maps can be very powerful. And just take a look at this map. You can pause here if you need to get a sense of what kind of information is being conveyed. So whoever produced this map is obviously trying to get you to see some correlation between the United States and its involvement in the Middle East and the level of development that countries in the Middle East may enjoy. And so development is a very important concept that we're going to cover in every single chapter. It's going to be reoccurring. But the HDI is a collection of data on the basis of three main categories. And so when we look at countries and we rank their development, we're looking at GDP per capita, we're looking at literacy rates, and we're looking at life expectancy. And why we look at these three things is because we're getting a sense of what standards of living might be like for the people that live in those countries. And so when we're looking at GDP, maybe we're looking at the kinds of jobs that may be available. When we're looking at literacy rates, we're going to look at the education system. And when we're looking at life expectancy, we're looking at healthcare and the healthcare system. So again, like I said, when we're looking at maps, these maps can convey information visually and they can get you to consider things in different ways that maybe you wouldn't if you were just reading about it. All right, looking at map basics, we're going to be looking at some terms like place and toponym. Place is pretty straightforward. We're looking at a specific point on Earth with characteristics or a characteristic. So because of that characteristic, we know it to be a very distinctive place. So think of Disneyland and the characteristics that make us think that that is a place. Think of Vista del Lago High School. Think of the Capitol building, right? And then when we think of toponym, we're looking at a place name, and toponyms are often rooted in history, maybe religion. That can be something that we see in California. So when we look at the names of cities in California, like San Diego, San Francisco, San Fernando, those are all named after saints. A location is the position a place is on Earth's surface. And so we can look at both relative and absolute location. We'll break that down. Before we do that, however, let's look at some geographic connections here. Try to come up with three places and their locations, and please write them down. So I gave you three examples. Try to think of three different places on your own. And you can pause here if you need to. All right, let's get into location. First thing we're going to look at is site. And so we can look at physical characteristics of a place like climate, soil, vegetation. We're looking at a situation. Where is a place in relation with other places? So, this can help us find new places, for example. So if someone's trying to give us a relative location, they may try to explain where something is in relation to other places. So if I were going to ask someone where the closest Starbucks may be, they would give me relative directions. They would say, oh, well, if you're parked up at the library at Vista del Lago, make sure you drive down the hill make a U-turn at Golf Lanes, go all the way down till you hit East Bidwell, make a left, and you're going to see the huge Palladio. It's that beautiful complex on your right after you hit a couple stoplights. Turn in there, you're going to see Nordstrom Rack on your right, and you're going to see Red Robin on your left, and right across from there, you're going to see Starbucks. And so that would be a sense of giving a relative location in its relation to another place. All right, now looking at absolute location, that's going to be much more precise. And so we're looking at degree points. And so you probably were first introduced to this back in 4th grade when you looked at latitude and longitude lines. And those lines exist on Earth's surface, and they help us understand where those absolute locations are and where those degree points are. So actually where you're sitting right now, if you're in your bedroom, if you're in an office, if you're on a couch, if you're in a car, there is an absolute set of degree points attached to where you are, and that is your absolute location. Another way to look at absolute location would be a street address as well. So you're attaching some kind of number to an exact location. And so another way that you can think of absolute location, I mean, we've got very sophisticated devices that we use for absolute location now. So when we're looking at GPS, many of you get on your phone and you're looking for the closest, let's say, fast food restaurant or department store or gas station. Absolute location is used for you to find out where those exact places are. When you get on TikTok, that's so that, someone can find out exactly where you are at all times. When you get on your Snapchat, you can click on your location. And so think of all the different ways that your location is being tracked as we speak. All right, here is a place. So take a look at this picture. I hope all of you recognize it. And I want you to be prepared to discuss it. So analyze it according to the different parts. Why is the toponym or the place name what it is, right? What is it rooted in? What is the site? And what is the situation? And what is the absolute location? If you need to look it up, you're more than welcome to. So pause here if you need to take some time. And here's the picture again. All right, we're going to be getting into scale now, and you may see a few questions on your first assessment in relation to scale, so make sure that you understand it. It's pretty simple to understand, but a lot of people make mistakes because they don't quite understand it. So when we're looking at scale, we're looking at how much detail and area you're going to be showing. So when you're looking at a map, often you do it on your phone. And when you move your fingers around to look at that map, that can give you a sense of scale. So when we're looking at a cartographic map scale, we're looking at a ratio between size of area on the map and actual size on Earth. So for example, the best way to explain that would be through a fraction, although you can also write this in written form, and you can read it in a ratio form as well. So if we're looking at these two maps here, we've got Atlanta. And so we're looking at a small scale for the first one and a large scale for the second one. Where people get confused is they think, oh, well, it's a much larger space, so it's got to be a large scale. No, you've got far less details. And when you have far less details, then you are looking at a smaller scale. When you have more details, you're looking at a larger scale. So when you have more details on a smaller amount of space, that's a large scale. When you have less details on a larger amount of space, that's actually a small scale. All right, this will make it hopefully much clearer to you. So smaller scale equals larger land area and a smaller number of details. Large scale equals smaller land area, larger number of details. And so if you think about it in fraction form, that's the best way to gauge that because you know what a larger fraction is and a smaller fraction is. But when you write it as a ratio, people often associate the large with the larger number versus the smaller number. So I don't mean to confuse you, but I think you'll get it. All right, so let's go ahead and just test this out here. Would you consider this a large scale map or a small scale map? Next one, would you consider this a large scale map or a small scale map? All right, so you should have considered this one a small scale map. So even though it seems to be a larger area, there's not a whole lot of detail. When you look at this map, you're zooming in on a much smaller area, but you're getting much more detail. So that's going to be a larger scale. All right, so where stuff is, looking at space and distribution. Maps are really important because they give us a sense of a gap between two physical or two objects. So physical gap between two objects. If we're trying to understand the differences, especially when it comes to distribution between two areas. If we're looking at a map of the United States, for example, and we're trying to get a sense of, let's say, I don't know, political affiliation, or maybe we're getting a sense of demographics in relation to ethnicity or socioeconomic status. We might be able to see some patterns across the country on the basis of that space and distribution. All right, so talking about distribution again, I know I mentioned this, we're looking at density. So oftentimes when we think about distribution, we think of population density maps. And so the darker the colors, the more population there may be. But we can also look at density on the basis of demographics as well. So this map shows New England. And so we can also look at how individuals identified themselves on the basis of their ethnicity. And so I know a lot of people always have that question, well, American, like, is that a thing? How is that different from, the ancestry of these other demographics? And so, that is just how people would self-identify. So assuming that many of the Americans who marked American also had ancestry and roots in, or may have European roots, they may not necessarily identify with those or be familiar with them. And so they don't mark those boxes. All right, looking at concentration, how features are spread over space. So are they clustered? Do we see some patterns when it comes to where individuals reside? So if we're looking at race or ethnicity, for example, and so you can see that on this map here, if we're looking at the concentration or the clustering of African Americans in Southeast Michigan. Are they dispersed is also something to think of as well. So where things may be really far apart. Oh, okay. Now we're going to be looking at patterns. So when we look at maps, we're going to see a lot of geometric arrangement of objects in space. So for example, when we look at cities, especially big cities, typically you might have a huge physical feature and the geometric lines and arrangement of homes and streets are going to be organized around those physical features. And so we do see those grids, for example, if you're flying in an airplane and you're flying over a city, it's very obvious that you see the geometric patterns that way. All right, what you're going to do next is go to page 46 in your textbook, and I'm actually going to have you do this in your own time, and you'll do this after our discussion, but you'll go to page 46 and look at the map of population distribution. You'll describe the map in writing, focusing on location, scale, and distribution, and make sure that you're using your vocab words. All right, so we're going to look at the world map. This is looking at physical features. It's going to be useful for you to know the major physical features of the world. You want to be able to locate, label, and color the ones on this list. And you obviously are not going to necessarily be able to work together. If you want to Zoom with each other, you're welcome to, or talk on the phone. This is just an exercise, and you can do this on page 41. I will not be collecting this, however. And lastly, I just wanted to put up a map of the world to remind you that you have your map quizzes that you're doing. So there are 20 map quizzes that you should be doing. I think there was a typo in my last assignment that I changed and edited. Originally, I said that there were 17, but I think I had 2 of them up there twice. So just add another Your Choice World one. And you should be submitting, you can submit them individually. They'll all show up under your name, but put them in the same assignment and I will get them. But you have about 4 weeks to do that. I would do it the sooner the better, because that just means that you've got that knowledge and you're able to apply that as soon as you can, because we're going to start looking at maps and comparing regions of the world when it comes to many different topics pretty early on. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me, and that's the end of our lecture today. Tomorrow we will continue with Unit 1, but this is just the first part, okay? Thank you for joining, and we're going to go ahead and start our discussion now, so make sure that you are prepared in teams to respond to some of the questions that I had up.